Hi, everyone, and welcome to this kickoff webinar of the Agroforestry series, a series of webinar and events that is designed specifically for institutional landowners and ag professionals. This is a series hosted by the Delta Institute and organized in partnership with Liberty Prairie Foundation and the Savannah Institute. I'm Barbara Decré, the Wisconsin Community Agroforester at the Savannah Institute, and I'm really excited to be here today to launch the Agroforestry series webinar and tell you more about the great project that brought us all together today. So before we get started, I'll give you a quick overview of today's webinar. The first half or so will be spent on introducing the series and the partners, but for the second half, we'll turn it to you to share your input in what we hope to be a very interactive manner. So first, we'll tell you a bit more about the project that brought us all together for this agroforestry series and hear from Keith Gilly, the executive director of the Savannah Institute, about agroforestry as an opportunity to address some of the challenges of our food system. We'll then take a little bit of more time to introduce the partners on this project and what we imagine this agroforestry series to look like over the next few months. So because of our shared desire to improve farming practices on the land, the Savannah Institute, Liberty Prairie Foundation, the Delta Institute, and a couple of other organizations have partnered on an EPA grant aimed at improving water quality in the Gulf of Mexico. For this project, we are working to introduce farmers and landowners to agroforestry and its impact on water quality. We want to engage 16,000 farmers and landowners in Illinois and Wisconsin each year. And we're going to be hosting field days and events at Demonstration Farm, as well as this webinar series specifically focused on the needs of institutional landowners and ag professionals. So to start us off, I'm really happy to pass the mic to Keith Gilly, the Executive Director of the Savannah Institute, for opening remarks.
Thank you, Barbara, and thanks everyone who's here, the organizers and participants. I've been asked to share in about 5 minutes some of the things that are most important to me in my personal and professional life. So we'll see if I can do it in 5 minutes. If you could advance the slides, I don't think I have the ability to do that. Next slide, please. This is a photograph. I see that Kurt Miney is one of the participants on the call. Kurt, so glad that you're here. Kurt and I did a book together called The Driftless Reader, and this is a photograph we used in the book and in many presentations about it that is from a couple of watersheds north of where I grew up in Southwest Wisconsin. And from the Dust Bowl era, this demonstrates just the capacity for really wrecking the land and the fundamental source of our prosperity and livelihoods through farming. And this is before the advent of tractors and hybrid seeds and chemicals and everything. And so one of the points here is that it's actually fundamental to the way that we do farming, some of these problems. And some of the parts of modern agriculture have made it slightly better, and some of the parts of modern agriculture have made it worse by simplifying the landscape for wildlife and such. The focus here, I believe, is primarily water quality. But what we do is really look at how do we fundamentally change the way that we practice agriculture so that these sorts of outcomes aren't just less bad, but actually we can do more to restore the landscapes and communities that depend on them. Next slide, please. Next slide, is that possible there? So the way that we see the landscape now, oftentimes we break it into different parts based on our objectives for that part of the landscape. But what this overlooks is that, of course, the great insight of ecology, that everything really is fundamentally connected and dependent on each other. And so rather than saying we're going to have nature over there and people over here and agriculture here, and this is where we do conservation, how do we really work with the land in a way that our agriculture accomplishes the aims of conservation? Because doing conservation on the edges isn't giving us the outcomes that we need in terms of water quality, wildlife habitat, carbon sequestration, healthy food, healthy communities, the list goes on. So the solution, if you could go to the next slide, please, that we focus on is something called agroforestry. And that's a fancy word for integrating more trees and perennial vegetation in our farming systems. And the USDA and a lot of scientific practice specifies this according to a number of practices, from forest farming to silvopasture to alley cropping to riparian forest buffers and windbreaks. And I believe that Barbara will be talking more about some of these forms of agriculture later on in this talk. But really at the core, it's about how do we make trees and other perennial vegetation a more fundamental part of agricultural landscapes that are more complex and interactive than our monocultures that we see currently in most of the landscape. Next slide, please. And the reasons that we do this are many, and sometimes we call this multifunctional agriculture. So an agriculture that does more than just give us high yields of calories and of fiber, but an agriculture that helps to provide solutions for our climate, for our water, for rural economies, for wildlife, food, soil health, and even animal welfare, having shade and shelter for livestock, access to pasture as a part of agroforestry systems. Next slide, please. So it's something of a Swiss Army knife of agricultural approaches. In terms of water quality, there's a lot of different data sets that we could throw at you. Just to give you one sort of visual here very briefly, compared to some of these other interventions that you hear about, cover crops, edge of fields, bioreactors is a place where they sort of catchment of runoff, the way that we apply our fertilizers, that all helps, but adding perennial vegetation to the landscape really changes the game in terms of water quality. And next slide, please. This gets pretty technical, so I'll have to gloss over it, but there have been a lot of papers recently at the academic literature highlighting amongst all the climate solutions that we have to reduce emissions, as well as getting carbon that's already in the atmosphere out of the atmosphere and into our biosphere and our soils. Agriculture sequestering carbon, this among developing nations, you can see the rose-colored section of the big bar at the top in the United States. Agriculture's capacity to reduce carbon is where a lot of our mitigation potential is. And then if we break out that piece of it, next slide, please, that rose-colored section, that's agriculture's piece of sequestering carbon. That's the second bar in. And you can see the rose-colored bar segment of that bar again is agroforestry. So compared even to the other pieces of the ways that we mitigate climate change in our landscapes, soil carbon in croplands, soil carbon in grasslands, the cost-effective mitigation potential of agroforestry, just in developing countries we're talking about here now, globally, it's even more impressive. Agroforestry has more potential there. And then the one below agroforestry, interestingly, this is a side note, biochar. That's a way of taking woody debris, basically low-grade woody biomass, and turning it into a soil amendment that will stay in the soil and maintain carbon there, along with improving soil function. We need woody biomass in order to produce biochar effectively. So there's a connection to agroforestry there as well. So a very quick dive into the data there, but this is just to, I guess maybe I have one more data slide here. This is older data, but we synthesized a couple of papers a few years back and just said, well, beyond what the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has said that agroforestry is one of our most important land management strategies for sequestering carbon. What if beyond their sort of modest adoption targets, we really went full tilt for agroforestry across global croplands? And the amount of carbon dioxide equivalent we could sequester is over 10% of yearly global emissions, which is about 40 gigatons a year. So it's the kind of thing that, if adopted widely, could really move the needle on climate change. And again, I know that water quality is one of the focus, as it should be for this group. I think everything that we do in our agricultural landscapes, like much of society now, needs to include a climate change filter as well. So those are a couple of the points I wanted to make in terms of why this really matters, that we're all doing this, that you all are a part of this, and that we're working cooperatively in our landscapes and our communities with producers and everyone in food value chains, which happens to be everyone actually, to do our part to clean up the water and to stabilize our climate. So that's unfortunately, I'm not able to stay for the whole session here because of another engagement, but I really appreciate the opportunity to give my 2 cents on why agroforestry matters and why I'm really excited that we have the opportunity to work with you all on seeing it happen more in our landscapes and our communities. So thanks again.
Thank you, Keith. It's really helpful for us that you're putting this situation into perspective and highlighting the potential for agroforestry as a solution. So thanks for joining us. If you in the audience still have questions about agroforestry, please don't worry. This webinar series will hopefully address all of them. And to add a little bit more to what Keith just told you about the Savannah Institute, we are a nonprofit based in Champaign-Urbana in Madison, Wisconsin. And our mission is to catalyze the development and adoption of resilient, scalable agroforestry. And we do that by developing tree crops that are productive and resilient and allow the development of robust supply chains. We also work to develop farming systems that are ecologically and economically resilient. And then we work with stakeholders to make them into experts of agroforestry, engage landowners and investors to build social resilience. Our vision is a multifunctional agriculture in the Midwest based on agroforestry system of integrated trees, crops, and livestock that foster ecological resilience, climate stability, economic prosperity, and vibrant communities. So in this project, what does it mean? It means that we have a lot of developed programs to achieve this vision, including an apprenticeship program where we place beginning farmers onto agroforestry farm to get training. We have a research and demonstration farm network that allows us to demonstrate to farmers in Wisconsin and Illinois what agroforestry practices can look like at scale. We also have a tree crop commercialization team that works to develop markets for the perennial crops that our community grows. We host an annual perennial farm gathering that brings together the community to connect and learn from each other. This past year, we launched our technical service program, which allows us to guide farmers and landowners through the design process and help them access cost share funding from NRCS to implement agroforestry. And we also conduct a lot of research and regularly produce educational resources on agroforestry that are made available for free on our website. We're really excited to see all of you today because as institutional landowners and ag professionals, you have the power to work with farmers to make change on the land. And a lot of land in Illinois is institutionally owned or owned by the government, including the Illinois DNR. And there are very few requirements for conservation on this land, although a lot of it is adjacent to waterways. So there's a lot of potential for agroforestry to allow productive farming practices that also meet our conservation goals. For this specific project, in partnership with Delta Institute and the Liberty Prairie Foundation, you'll be working with our community agroforesters, Katie Adams in Illinois, who's currently on maternity leave, but will come back and be the main point of contact for our institutional landowners, and myself, Barbara Lecrae. I'm located in Wisconsin. One project I wanted to tell you a bit more about, because I think it might be super interesting, is our research demonstration farm network. It's a network of 7 farms in Illinois and Wisconsin that are demonstrating agroforestry practices at scale. These farms are not only great examples of agroforestry designs on the land, they're also offer really important examples of partnerships between landowners, whether they're private or institutional, farmers, and nonprofits. And they use long-term leases to allow the implementation of long-term agricultural practices that will meet our economic, social, and environmental goals. So if you're interested in visiting one of these farms, we are excited to be hosting a lot of events over the summer, or don't hesitate to reach out. The map on the screen right now is a little outdated. We have a couple more farms in Illinois, and we are starting our own home farm in Spring Green, Wisconsin as well. So for now, I think that's enough about the Savannah Institute. So I'll pass it to Riley to tell you a little bit more about the Delta Institute.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Barbara. I'm going to try to take back control here. Yeah, really great introductions and context from both Barbara and Keith. It's much appreciated. Delta Institute is one of the 3 organizations, core organizations partnering on this project. I am on the programs team with the organization, and Delta Institute is a non-for-profit based out of Chicago. We have been collaborating with communities throughout the Midwest to solve environmental challenges for a couple decades now. And our vision really entails a region in which communities and landscapes can thrive together through applying integrated approaches to environmental, economic, and social challenges and the various intersections thereof. This partnership falls under our resilient agriculture portfolio, and the theory of change kind of underlying the work we do in this business unit is to expand conservation practices to farms throughout the Midwest by applying practical, feasible approaches to implementation that are evidence-based and proven to sequester carbon and mitigate financial risk to the folks that are putting practices in the ground. We've got a bunch of projects currently ongoing in this business unit. We're working with farmers, institutional landowners, and appraisers to uncover the relationship between soil health and land value. We're wrapping up kind of the third round of pay for performance conservation auctions in the Kalamazoo River watershed. And then we're really rounding out this bucket of work with this partnership with the Savannah Institute and Liberty Prairie Foundation. So we're thrilled to be a part of it and really are looking forward to the rest of the conversation today and over the next 2 years through this webinar and the bunch of events that are going to be hosted. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Nathan.
All right, thank you, Riley. Thank you, Barbara. So the Liberty Prairie Foundation is based in Grays Lake, Illinois, about an hour north of Chicago. We're located within the Prairie Crossing Conservation Community. And I use this slide to sort of illustrate where we are, but also what we're about. And we're about, in a way that's similar to Delta, we're about finding practical ways for human communities and nature to thrive together. And Prairie Crossing is sort of significant because it's an effort by George and Vicki Ranney and some other very far-sighted people to create a community where there is agriculture and there is nature, and it's all sort of works together. So we have prairie burns and all kinds of things happening in our community. It was a very significant and sort of decisive idea to sort of include agriculture in a conservation community. For a long time, I think people in the conservation world kind of thought of agriculture as the black sheep of land use. And instead, our founders from the very beginning saw that agriculture was indeed the major way we use land. And so if we're going to have a solution to how we live on this planet, it has to involve agriculture. And so on our farm, we have, can you advance the slide? Oh, Riley, thank you. So on our farm, we have several programs. We have an incubator program. We also have youth education and some other interesting, innovative projects. One of the things that's emerged from our programming has been a land access program called Northeast Illinois Farm Link that's funded by FLOW. And the intent of this program has been to connect primarily sustainable, regeneratively minded farmers and landowners around the Northeast Illinois landscape. And we definitely want to see agroforestry part of that mix. And we've been very gratified to see farmers and landowners coming to us and wanting to connect. That's a complex world. And running this program has made us aware of some of the many issues, practical issues that face landowners and farmers and the whole regenerative perennial agriculture movement. This is a slide that's slightly cropped. It's from the 2012 Census of Agriculture, and the darker the color in a county, the more a greater percentage of land that's leased out to a farmer rather than being owned by the farmer operator themselves. And then what you're going to find in this whole series, and one of the characteristics of the Savannah Institute that we really appreciate is that they are both idealistic and also practical. And we are going to face the realities of land access and agroforestry in our work. And so, as you can see, Illinois is largely dominated by a very high percentage of leased land. And when you're leasing land, unless the landowner is with you and giving you a good lease and giving lots of incentives, it can be difficult to justify big investments in perennial agriculture. So that's one thing we need to overcome. And then another thing we have to overcome and work with is the fact that there's a lot of transitions of land coming, and that amount is going to continue to grow. And that also makes it a question of in a landscape that's going to be transitioning and having succession, how does perennial agriculture fit within that kind of land access arrangement or land access situation? So that's another thing that is conceivably a challenge to systems like agroforestry. The good news is there are examples of people and landowners working together. This is a photo taken of Jackie Davis on the right. She's a landowner in central Illinois, and Will Glazek on the left. And she was looking for a farmer that would sort of farm with that more regenerative approach in mind. And just by chance at a conference, she heard him talking about cover crops, and she said, I need to talk to this guy. And so they worked out an arrangement. They've been farming together and working together, and it shows that it's possible in our very individualistic world for people to cooperate together around land and farming. And I think there's more of that coming. Another great example of sort of innovative, thoughtful approaches to perennial agriculture is the McHenry County Conservation District, which has teamed up with Rooter Bison, a family farm that grazes bison. And the McHenry County Conservation District has given a 15-year lease to this farm business to graze buffalo on restored prairie and corn and bean land that's also going to be restored. And I think that illustrates that with creativity, this kind of farming, as well as agroforestry, can be really successful and can bring a lot of benefits to everyone. And finally, I just want to end with our own commitment at our farm that we own and manage in the Prairie Crossing community. We have a 6-acre food forest that's being developed by Jen and Jeff Miller of Prairie Wind Family Farm. They're on the left, and they were just illustrating this to another landowner. And so they have planted chestnuts and persimmons and pawpaws and elderberries with the hope and conviction that in a few years this is going to start paying off for them, and also be a way of growing and also a way of sharing their lessons with other people. We're really happy to be part of this project. Barbara?
Yeah, so we're gonna take a pause here. You've heard a lot about us and who we are as a project team and as organizations. But while we have y'all here, I'm really hoping to hear a little bit about who's in the room and who you work for and kind of where you're from. So I'm gonna go out on a limb here and just call on some names, and if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself and providing just a quick introduction, it would be much appreciated. And while I'm going down the list, if you could as well, just in the chat box, provide a brief response to the prompt that you'll see on your screen, and just describe how common agroforestry is in your area. So while we're thinking about that question, I'll start from the top here. John, I'm not going to.
Saxhog.
Saxhog. All
Yes,
right.
that's right.
I didn't want to embarrass
Good job.
You or myself. But yeah, John, if you just mind introducing yourself.
I'm John Saxhog. I actually live in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis, but I have a tree farm in central Minnesota near Hinckley, Minnesota, which the majority part of it is a red pine plantation, 50 or 60 years old. But in the process of thinning it and also creating some clear cuts, I'm planting elderberry, hazelnut, and aronia and trying to work in some agroforestry.
Great. Thanks, John. Kurt, would you mind introducing yourself?
Well, sure. Kurt Miney here. I'm tuning in because I'm an advisor to the Savannah Institute, and I also am working with folks at Liberty Prairie and have a long history there. And I really appreciate this partnership. This is just great, and I really look forward to connecting with you some with a lot of common connections and interests. As for agroforestry, I get to live just a few miles down the road from the Savannah Institute's North Farm near Spring Green, Wisconsin. So that's my main connection right now. Although I also I won't go into a long story, but I also do work with propagating heirloom apple trees and hopefully be able to think about new ways to incorporate apples into agro-pastoral systems and other variations on the theme of typical orchards.
Great, thanks for that, Kurt. Lynn, would you mind introducing yourself? All right, we'll give Lynn a moment to respond, but maybe we'll go down to the 580 number. Who's that joining us? All right, we will give it another go. David Nguyen, would you mind introducing yourself briefly?
Hi, my name is David. I work with the Association of Illinois Soil and Water Conservation Districts. I'm just listening in to gather some more information. I don't really come from a farming background. I couldn't get the last part of your question. What was I supposed to say after introducing myself?
Yeah, not a problem. In the chat, if you wouldn't mind just describing how common agroforestry is in your area to your knowledge. I think we'd all be interested to hear what's going on the ground and how visible it is to folks in a given area. But thanks for joining us today, David. You're very welcome among this group. So your attendance is much appreciated.
Thank you for having me.
All right, let's try David Randolph. Are you on the line? And if so, could you briefly introduce yourself? All right, we're just going to keep running down the list. Gary Wyatt, would you be able to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, Gary Wyatt from Minnesota. Agroforestry in Minnesota, mainly windbreaks. Silvopasture is really becoming a popular program right now. And then with the Sustainable Farming Association being another agency that's a nonprofit that's really promoting agroforestry and also silvopasture. So we do have some forest farming. We are actually doing a lot of food forests in communities and towns and promoting that to families in their backyard. Aronia berry, hazelnuts can be planted for food for families. So those types of projects are mainly being done in Minnesota.
Great, thanks for that, Gary. That sounds really exciting. We're going to keep chugging along here. Joan Atchison, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, this is Joan. I currently live in just south of the Twin Cities. I have a third interest in a farm in northern Anoka County, and what farming is going on there is pretty much corn, soybean in lots of suburbs. I also own 80 acres in southeast Kansas and was hoping to do elderberries and other things down there. But about a dozen of my neighbors have gotten together and decided that my whole plan was against how they wanted farming to go on in their neighborhood. So I'm in the process of selling that land and hoping buying land somewhere else.
All right, thanks for offering that, Joan, and welcome. Catherine Hoy, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, this is Kat. I am actually dialing in from Maine. I have very little experience with farming, but I've moved here with an interest in developing a type of agroforestry farm. I would say that from a perennial standpoint, we have blueberry here, certainly some elderberry, but I'm particularly interested because Maine is something like less than 10% prime agricultural land in agroforestry because so much of our land is forest based. So particularly silvopasture, we'll see what happens.
Thanks, Kat. I am hoping to make it up to Maine myself this summer, so I'm jealous of your current location, and thanks for joining us today. Katie Walsh, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, my name's Katie. I work with the Winnebago County Soil and Water Conservation District out of Rockford, Illinois. So being with the Conservation District, we work alongside NRCS and FSA offices.
Great, thanks, Katie. Let's see, Maria, would you mind introducing yourself? All right, we will move along. Megan Lewis, Delta Institute's program director, it has joined us today. I'm not sure if she wants to introduce herself to the group, but it would be great if so.
Sure, I'm happy to introduce myself. I'm excited to hear from all the different people who are dialing in from not just here in the Midwest, but all the way up in Maine to hear about this program, and just really excited with this partnership that we have with Savannah Institute and Liberty Prairie Foundation to advance agroforestry. So thanks for everybody for joining.
Thanks so much, Megan. Michael Baruch.
Hey everyone, white passing male here from Iowa. I have no land, but interested in agroforestry. I have a master's and went on an agroforestry tour south of Des Moines. At a few places, they were growing chestnuts, hazelnuts, and pawpaw. But I think that is obviously the exception to corn and soy, Iowa. But there's also a fella in eastern Iowa doing growing trees for windbreaks. So that's interesting.
Great, thanks, Michael. Welcome. And I think last on my list is Scott Grimm. If you'd like to introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Hello, my name is Scott. I currently live in Southern California. I was recently considering moving back to the Midwest. That's originally where I'm from, and was interested in possibly looking at agroforestry as far as maybe a career change or something I could do on the side. It was kind of I don't have a farming background, much like David, but it's something I was interested in, and kind of a shift and change of pace for me. So I'm here to absorb as much as I can.
Great. Well, we are glad to have you. I think I made it through everybody that wanted to introduce themselves today. I'm really excited to hear kind of the diversity of voices that are in the room. And that's really one of the big goals we have for this webinar series, is to draw as many folks into the conversation as we can. So with that in mind, I think y'all are probably waiting to hear a little bit more about what we're referring to when we say this webinar series. So over the next 2 years, we have 9, including this webinar, 9 webinar events planned to deliver information with regard to how agroforestry can be implemented and what those benefits are that can be derived. And each webinar will be structured similarly. The first 30 minutes or so, just like today, will be spent kind of bringing in experts to go over in some detail a technical component of the practice. But we really want these webinars to lean into the interactivity and really leverage the folks that have joined the webinars. So when we, kind of do a roll call and I asked to hear from the folks in the room. That's very purposeful. We like for these webinars to ultimately be discussion based and collaborative. So the last 30 minutes of these webinars is typically going to be spent going through an interactive activity, and then hopefully that activity will lead to some discussion to be had, and we'll tease that out a little bit more today. And we actually do have an interactive activity for you later. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to our partner, Barbara, to talk a little bit more about the topics that we're looking to cover in this webinar series.
Yes, thanks, Riley. It's so great to hear from all of you and what your interests are, because again, we want this webinar series to really give you all the tools you need to get started or advise people that are coming to you with questions about agroforestry. So we intend for this webinar series to be really designed around the needs of the community. So we have a couple of ideas of topics that we think we should talk about, but we want your input on the order or the interest that you have for these topics. The first idea we had is a Agroforestry 101, kind of going over the basics of agroforestry, introducing some of the practices and benefits, kind of diving a little deeper into what Keith introduced earlier. And we have proposed this webinar as the next one we will be hosting in June. Considering the needs and goals of this EPA grant, we're also interested in focusing our next webinar in September on water quality and the nutrient loss reduction strategy. And after that, we have a couple of ideas, and we want you to tell us what you think is most interesting, most important. One of them could be introducing our technical service program at Savannah Institute and our technical service providers, taking you through the process from outlining your goals and vision to the design and cost share opportunities. Another suggested topic is land access and financing for agroforestry. As Nathan mentioned earlier, agroforestry practices can be costly to implement and take time to provide return on investment. So secure land tenure and sound business plans are a must. So in this webinar, we could discuss land access options, including long-term leases and funding opportunities. As Keith mentioned, agroforestry practices are farming practices that directly support our environment. And one of the webinars could be focusing on how agroforestry can help farmers and landowners meet their conservation goals. But because we're talking about farming, it's also important for the trees to do their part in supporting farmers' livelihoods. So another idea for a webinar could be Trees for Profit, where we would discuss what practices and crops can return the most profit to farmers based on locations. And finally, we could definitely offer webinars that dive deeper into individual practices such as riparian forest buffers, alley cropping, or windbreaks, and would give you a bit more technical information about the practices and the benefits that they offer. So again, these are suggested topics, and in a minute, we'll give you an opportunity to provide some feedback on what topics you're most interested in and what you would like us to prioritize for this scheduling. But while we meet every quarter for this webinar series of the agroforestry series, so in March today, in June, in September, and then in December of 2022 and 2023, we also want to officially invite you to attend the other events hosted as part of this project. So as you can see on this slide, there's a lot of events happening, and this one only covers the spring and summer of 2022. So you can expect many more opportunities to meet with us virtually or in person to learn more about agroforestry over the next couple of years. So starting in May, our partner, the Land Conservancy of McHenry County, will be hosting their monthly Women Learning Circle. In June, we will host our Agroforestry 101 webinar, but you'll also be able to see agroforestry implemented on the land by attending a few events, including the Food Forest Farm Tour, hosted by Liberty Prairie Foundation, or one of the many field tours at the Savannah Institute demo farms. These farms, again, will be hosting field tours all throughout the summer and in September, when we will meet again for our virtual third webinar on water quality. So I know this slide is very busy, and don't worry, after this webinar is over, you'll receive an email with follow-up information, including our contacts and this list of events. So that's a lot of talking from us. And again, we're glad that you told us a little bit more about yourself, but I think I'll pass it back to Riley to introduce the interactive part of this webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. So like you said, Barbara, we've done a lot of talking. We've been able to hear a little bit from the folks in the room, but now I'd like to take that a step further and present an opportunity to interact on a meaningful level. And to do so, I'm going to pull up an interactive polling exercise. And to join this polling platform on your phone or your computer, just go to www.pollev.com/Riley Mans 597, and the spelling for all of that is on your screen. And Barbara also just added it into the chat. Now, to do this, you're going to need to minimize or just hide the Zoom, the actual webinar presentation, so that you can participate. But we will be able to see the results in real time as they appear once folks join. So I'm going to give folks just a second to get on. It looks like we're having some success as results come in, and we all should be able to see some of these preliminary results. So at least so far, most folks are reporting kind of a somewhat understand level with agroforestry to a good understanding. I think that's really encouraging to see. But we'll give folks a couple more minutes to provide their responses. And if folks are having trouble, just unmute yourself or send me a message in the chat and we can try to do some troubleshooting.
It's interesting here, Riley, to see that I have an excellent understanding is kind of the bottom of the list. And I think that's a reflection of the fact that agroforestry is still kind of a field of agriculture on the edge. And I think people are also being very honest. Agroforestry is a pretty nuanced and sophisticated approach to farming.
I'm also glad to see that no one said no understanding at all. It means it's not that, that blurry. And that gives us a good sense of how deep to dive into some of the topics as we move forward with the webinar. So thank you for your input.
Yeah, absolutely. With that, I think we'll move on to the next question here. And this question kind of gets to our prompt that I asked for in the chat, but we're looking to get a sense of understanding around how visible are agroforestry practices in the field. Are you driving past, massive installations, or maybe you're not sure that you drove past an agroforestry laden field, you just didn't know it. So I'm interested to see what folks have to say here.
I'm glad to see the yeses winning. This is perhaps a little unexpected, but awesome to see that some of the demonstrations that have been set up, or some of the farmers that are, pioneers in agroforestry, are making an impact in their communities and showing what could be done. But it's a hard thing to be the only person doing agroforestry in your area.
And I think the maybe is also an interesting response too. And we wanted to include that personally because specifically because sometimes it's not always clear what agroforestry is or is not, especially in a beginning practice or something that's really mature. So that's also a really good, honest answer.
Yeah, that's very true. When we say windbreaks are agroforestry, people say, oh, then I know about this. I've seen this. And at the same time, the definition that the USDA kind of provides is so strict around 5 practices, when the reality of agroforestry is, whatever fits the land and a combination of all of these practices. So got to see some people have seen it, but are curious to see more too.
Absolutely. I think with that, folks have had a chance to respond. So we'll move to our third question. This one is a little bit more abstract. It might require a little bit more creativity. It's a word association game, right? So what words come to mind when you think of agroforestry? And I encourage you not to just submit one word. You're not limited here. So just kind of a train of consciousness as words, concepts come to you, throw them in here and we'll see what kind of takes the cake in terms of most commonly associated terms. Trees, unsurprisingly, I think we maybe took a bet that trees would win out here. I see yes hiding in there somewhere. So there are some words of affirmation, which is encouraging. Happy. I like that too.
Integrated is a great word. It's one that's very important.
Could you expand on that a little bit, Barbara? Why kind of integrated means something to you personally?
Yeah, so I can get into that a little later when we get into the depths of agroforestry in a sense. But when we talk about agroforestry, we talk about trees integrated in our agricultural systems, not separated. And that works as well when, you know, somebody put shrubs in there, and there's also like multi-layered, there's this integration of, you know, livestock, trees, and, you know, kind of agricultural systems as they exist. And so this interconnection and how everything is integrated, working together, but also the intentional management that's required when you integrate these trees into your system. You can't just put a tree and let it happen. You have to integrate what it serves, like it's what it is, into the system. I love this tree, this cloud. It's really cool.
Yeah, we're going to take this word cloud and we're going to print t-shirts for everybody.
Yes.
With Nathan's personal budget, right? I joke, but yeah, this is really exciting to see. And Barbara, thanks for providing kind of your insight into some of the meaning behind some of these terms. I think this is interesting, and it would be interesting to see how word clouds with this group kind of evolve as the webinar series progresses and we dive a little bit deeper into some of these topics. So I think with that, just keeping an eye on the time. Oh, sorry, Nathan, go ahead.
Just because I want to make sure everyone always understands things. Barbara, can you say something about coppicing, just to make sure people understand what that term is?
Ooh, yes, I can, but I'm not experimenting. I don't have that much experience with it myself. It's basically when you trim and prune your trees in a certain way so that they keep growing out and keep producing. This is a topic that agroforesters are really interested in. It's a practice that's very common in Europe. And so we have had some webinars at the Savannah Institute on the topic, and we have some experts now in the team. So if that's a topic that people are interested in, we can definitely bring in some coppicing experts from the Savannah Institute. I have to admit, this is not me.
So just to clarify, what I know is, just real quickly, coppicing is usually cutting the tree or shrub down to its base, and then it sends up new straight shoots that can be really useful for lumber and other uses. All right, we should probably keep moving.
Yeah, let's move along. I think that's a good conversation though, and credit to you, Kat, for throwing that up in the word cloud. All right, so this one's maybe a little bit more topical here, or maybe a little bit more focused rather. So the prompt is to offer what questions you have about agroforestry. And I realize there's not kind of an open-ended option here, but if you can kind of rank the options that are on your screen, I think that'll give us a sense of what's most important, at least today, to address in subsequent webinars. And this question is just a little bit different in how you respond to it. You should be presented with the list of questions, and you'll need to click on a question before you can kind of move it up or down in the list. So once you click on the question, you should be provided with an up or a down arrow, and that will allow you to move the order around. So we'll give folks a few minutes to respond here.
And the other thing you need to do is, once you've clicked and got the order you want, then you have to press the submit button down at the bottom.
Yeah, so I'll just say off the bat, it really seems like this group is hungry for details. The what is agroforestry question seems to be kind of bringing up the rear, which I think is really interesting and really encouraging just to have such an engaged group so early in the evolution of this webinar series. So again, just want to voice my kind of enthusiasm for who's on the call today.
Yeah, and despite the already kind of planned Agroforestry 101 webinar and maybe the water quality webinar, we'll be taking all of these in consideration and perhaps weaving some of these questions into these early webinars so that you don't have to wait until December to figure out, how can agroforestry impact a farmer's bottom line, but kind of putting these right away into the content of these first few webinars that we're hosting.
Yeah, great point there, Barbara. I'm looking at the time, and I think it's in our best interest to keep moving along. This is really interesting, and we'll consider how best to incorporate these topics in the near-term webinars. So the last question we have here is kind of the opportunity to provide some open-ended responses that were not included as potential options in the last question. So in short answers, and I don't think you're limited to one answer here, just let us know what other topics you'd like addressed in this webinar series. And I don't think anything's off the table here. I think we'd like to hear kind of every thought. So we'll give folks a few minutes before we wrap up today.
These are great suggestions. I'm taking notes and we're gonna keep track of these in the future, but this is really helpful.
That's a great question about climate and where people are located and what resources and plants would be best for them.
Yeah, and we will address most, if not all of these in the upcoming webinar. So thank you so much for including them, and feel free to keep sending us questions. If you end up coming up with the questions after the webinar is over, feel free to send us an email. And if you want to work with us right away, you can also reach out to me at the Savannah Institute to help you in your projects too.
Yeah. Absolutely. So with that in mind, I'm going to keep this this slide active so folks can keep submitting answers. But in the meantime, I'm going to bring us back to our presentation and turn it over to Barbara to kind of walk us out here.
Yes, thanks, Riley. And thank you everyone for all of your feedback. It's so exciting to see, interest and ideas and knowledge being shared. So we're really appreciative of your time and your you volunteering ideas. So for this agroforestry series, we hope that you will come out, with a lot of knowledge and feeling more confident in your ability to, implement agroforestry or advise other farmers and landowners you work with, or even, do it on the land that you're stewarding. And for that, we hope and we will make a lot of resources available and at your disposal, including recordings of these webinars series. And we want to remind you about the opportunities to see the practices implemented on the land through our on-farm events and demonstrations. So the ones we told you about in our calendar. We also want you to consider how you can get further involved in co-hosting some of these webinars with us. We joked with Kat that we could involve her in a coppicing webinar, but if there is a topic that you are familiar with or some questions that you really want answered and you think it's a full topic, then reach out to us and we can organize a webinar with you. And additionally, the Savannah Institute offers a lot of free resources online on our website. So you can go through our resource library where we have a lot of reports and fact sheets and books that we are making available for you for free. We also have a lot of training opportunities, including the apprenticeship program that I mentioned earlier, but also free online courses for beginning farmers. And we're working on courses that would train the trainers as well. And then again, come and join us at our in-person and virtual events, including the Perennial Farm Gathering, which will be hosted in December. And finally, a couple of you mentioned, wanting to hear from farmers, and one of our great resources is also our YouTube channel. So Savannah Institute on YouTube, you can hear there are a lot of stories of farmers who've already implemented agroforestry on their land and now work with mature systems, either by joining us during events and getting to meet them in person or checking out our videos on YouTube. So you can meet Kathy Dice, who is a farmer at Redfern Farm in Iowa and grows chestnuts and pawpaws in a UPEC operation. Or hear from Mark Shepard from New Forest Farm in Wisconsin. He's one of the leaders in agroforestry in the Midwest and has written a lot of foundational books. We also interviewed Jackie Hawk from Hawk Orchard, who has included livestock in the understory of our apple orchard in Minnesota, and Dan Shepard, who is at the head of a 280 acres pecan orchard in Missouri. So feel free to go check out these resources on our YouTube channel or to join us at events. And now with all that information, we hope that you're as excited as we are about this agroforestry series and looking forward to learning more about long-term agriculture practices that can benefit our communities, the farmer livelihoods, and our environment. If you're ready to work with us, get in touch with me by email and I'll happily support you in your process of implementing agroforestry practice on your land. And now, Riley, I haven't really kept up with the chat, but are there any questions or any discussion from the audience?
Yeah, it doesn't look like there's anything in the chat, but I think we do have a few minutes here if folks want to stay on to chat, pick our brains. Maybe we can pick yours. But it's been really great today. We're really appreciative of everybody's time and energy and for unmuting themselves and introducing what you're all about. I know that that's not always super comfortable.
And just to clarify, anyone who registered for this, you will be receiving emails about the next webinar. So don't worry, you don't have to go looking for it. That will be coming to you.
Yep. And this was a kickoff webinar, mostly trying to set up the tone for this webinar series. So we promise there'll be a lot more content, a lot more learning opportunities in the next few ones. So we hope that you'll join us again in June, in September, and then throughout the summer for our events.
And thanks again, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.